Hey everybody, Arthur here. Welcome to my end of year special, the best games of 2022 that you probably missed. This is episode 1 on Zelda-like action adventure games. It's going to be a series of videos throughout December, so stay tuned for the next videos. I'll do episodes on turn-based RPGs, action RPGs, Metroidvanias, 2D platformers, 3D platformers, puzzle games, you name it. And in this series I will definitely not be content in highlighting the already famous titles. In the case of today's video, those would be Tunic and Nobody Saves the World. I mean, don't get me wrong, those are great, but you already know about them, right? They're not hidden gems at all. And here we focus more on the obscure stuff, because this is from the void. I found a bunch of Zelda-like games worth a mention, though some I'm not including in the ranking because they are in early access, and one of them is free with a tiny scope, which wouldn't be fair to rank against the other ones. But the ranking is secondary, alright? It's all about the great games that came out and did not receive even a fraction of the attention and coverage that they deserve. And that's the mission of this channel. If you like it, I welcome you to join in. Subscribe, leave a like, a comment, support directly on Patreon. All of that will effectively help in growing the channel. So, alright, here we go. Welcome to the channel. This is From the Void. Okay, first on the list is definitely a rush of nostalgia for any Ocarina of Time or Majora's Mask fan, and it's clearly very much intentional as per the title of the game, Valkie 64. Don't get your hopes up too much. Despite the very good looking graphics for a N64 style inspired game and the clear homages to Ocarina of Time with the button layouts that you can see in the top right corner right there, the entire feeling of the combat, and I mean, look at this. If this doesn't immediately scream Hyrule Field to you, I don't know what does. But despite all that, Valkyrie 64 is still a humble game. It lacks in overall flair and life, the environments feel empty, the enemies are not too varied, there is a clear lack of polish that we have grown accustomed to in Zelda games in the little things like opening a treasure chest for instance, but the gameplay is absolutely solid. The combat feels fluid with a lock-on system that works rather well, the dungeon exploration is satisfying even if the puzzles are not as clever as in Zelda titles, but I mean, this is definitely a positive game, especially for those of us looking for a nostalgia kick from that distinct feeling of the N64, which is rarely seen even among indie games. Valkie 64 is only found on Steam so far, which is a shame because it would fit the Switch very nicely. Next is Shogunaria. One of the major features in this one are the different classes of characters you can choose in the beginning. There are 4 of them with different stats, abilities and even stories, which creates a great replayability aspect to the game. You also level up by defeating enemies and can allocate points to your health or mana as you prefer. Your abilities have to be purchased in town, and to use them you'll need to spend either mana or stamina depending on the ability, which creates a nice balance to keep you occupied during the fights. The major problem in Shogunaria, and the reason why it's not higher on the list, are the boss fights. Each boss has only 1 or 2 attacks, which makes them too basic and uninteresting. Regular enemies and exploring the dungeons are much more fun though. Shogunaria is definitely a decent Zelda-like experience exclusive to Steam right now, and among the less expensive on the list too. Next is one that got a very harsh reception that I could not disagree more with. Seriously, we're talking about Airoheart. This got a good amount of attention when it was announced, as it's very similar to A Link to the Past in presentation and gameplay. However, when it released, critics and players received it very mildly. Their reasons, however, I gotta say, are very shallow and definitely do not justify scores on the 6 range, in my opinion. Here they are. Shallow reason number 1. The game is too hard. I mean, I can see you dropping the score by half a point or so if it is hard enough to alienate a good portion of the audience, but a lot of them will definitely appreciate this, so I really don't see it as a reason to put this as a negative title. Then shallow reason number 2, it plays better with the D-pad than with the analog stick. I mean, seriously? First of all, that's how you played A Link to the Past, with the D-pad. Second, and more importantly, I'm not sure if they patched this in or not, but I found no issues playing with an analog stick, I swear. So I don't know what they're talking about here. And finally, the only reason I see true merit in is that the game is too expensive. It definitely is. The full price on consoles is ridiculous $39.99. This game should be somewhere around 15, maybe 20 bucks at most. On Steam, however, depending on your region, it may be in a fair price. In Brazil, where I live, for instance, it is going for about $13, which is a great price for this game in my opinion. But other than the price tag, Airoheart is excellent. The graphics are pleasant, it's a pretty challenging Zelda-like, the dungeons are full of pitfalls and traps, you gotta be very vigilant while playing, but that's a big positive in my opinion. The story is another highlight, is a pretty complex one, which is unusual for this kind of game, and Airoheart is pretty lengthy, which may partially justify the price. It lasts for about 25 to 30 hours. It has 9 dungeons and a huge world map. It's all pretty awesome in my view, I really enjoyed it. This is definitely underrated in my opinion. Next is a pretty awesome one, Kharon's Crypt. This was kickstarted back in 2017. They had a 2018 release date schedule, but it came out only in 2022. But the wait was worth it for sure. This is an excellent game. It is intentionally going for a Game Boy Color aesthetic, even including a mock-up of the Game Boy Color layout on the sides. The premise here is interesting. You are Death itself, who has been locked up in the most devious dungeon ever created so not to escape. And let me tell you, they made controlling Death be a lot of fun with plenty of interesting ideas. First, you can become ethereal, which allows you to ignore gravity, float over pits, and even pass through some objects. However, the catch is that in this form, Death cannot interact with things, so you'll need to defeat enemies and possess their bodies. This means you can become any of the many enemies you come across: slimes, skeletons, warriors, even bats, and they all control as you would expect. As a bat, you can fly over traps for instance, but cannot open chests. It's a pretty intricate and impressive gameplay, I gotta say. Other than that, it controls pretty much exactly like a top-down Zelda game. You'll have to find your way through the dungeon, searching for keys and new powers to solve the puzzles, defeat the enemies, and get the hell out of there. It's an excellent game right here, Kharon's Crypt. Try it out, you will not be disappointed. This next one is probably the better known on the list, but not nearly as much as its predecessor. This is Blossom Tales 2, The Minotaur Prince. This is a pretty solid action-adventure right here. The graphics are colorful and pleasant. the story is quirky and wholesome, the dungeons and the entire pacing of the game are on point, and the only thing I can complain about it is that it doesn't really have any big new gimmicks or ideas that set it completely apart in the gameplay department, but that only makes this game not a masterpiece. It's still an excellent title even without it. I really think that Blossom Tales 2 passed by largely unnoticed, which is a huge shame because it deserves a close look in the least from most Zelda fans. Before revealing the winner, let's take a look at the games that don't really fit the ranking, the early access games that came out this year. Starting with Super Dungeon Maker. This is a great one, the graphics are fantastic, it's instantly humorous, as this is clearly a Zelda style game where you control the most infamous of all creatures in the Zelda universe, the chicken. And there's a demo out for it, which I really suggest you play because it gives us a pretty good feel of the game mechanics. It feels great to control, and you have a cool set of moves like the roll dash that can be used to pass through gaps, which is really nice. The enemy AI is well made so far, with interesting behaviors, and of course, the star of the show here is the dungeon making editor. It's incredibly well made with all the necessary tools, easy to learn and fast to create dungeons with. I do wish there was a full campaign from the developers. So far there is only a small one in the demo, and unfortunately I don't think they're making one for the 1.0 release. They're going to leave all the adventuring to be created by the community, which can be a turn-off for some, but if you like searching for the best creations out there, this is already a treat. Next we have Seeking Light. This has nice graphics, but the animations are a bit lacking, especially the dash and jump animations, which are just nothing. I mean, there is no animation there. She is just moving completely still. It's kinda jarring. There are also reports of bugs at this point, but as it's in early access, we can expect those to be fixed. The highlights though are in the premise, which explores the protagonist's fears that take shape as her enemies, and in the gameplay, both the exploration with interesting puzzles as well as the combat with challenging boss fights. This one kinda reminds me of Death's Door with great potential, so I'm hoping that we'll get a good amount of effort from the developers to fix the bugs and improve the visuals as well, and other than that they just need to make more of it, and we may end up with a pretty great 3D Zelda-like here. Up next is one that I realize doesn't look like much, but it's an excellent game. Flatworld. The graphics here are definitely a letdown. The character models are too basic, completely incapable of conveying personality to the characters, and the environments are also lacking polish overall. But the gameplay is surprisingly great, really surprisingly great. The whole thing feels on point. You have multiple characters to switch between, each with different traits and abilities. The main one can melt ice, another one can move stuff with his mind, all of which are used in pretty clever and satisfying puzzles in the dungeon, and the combat also feels great, even in boss fights. So gameplay wise, Flatworld is simply excellent. My only issue with the game were the visuals, which are way less important, so this remains a very positive title for sure. It's in early access so far, with only the initial chapter complete, so it remains to be seen how the game wraps up, but high expectations for sure. Next is one that released in 2021, but in 2022 it got a free update / DLC that is a complete game changer. This is Baldo The Guardian Owls, the Three Fairies edition. Baldo is not much of a hidden gem, I realize, but I think that the incredibly meaningful update totally is. This game came out pretty much broken, the combat moves were delayed, making it unenjoyable, which I think was the major issue, but they totally fixed that, along with pretty much all other issues, such as saving problems, using the map, dying from falling, and so on. Now the game became much better. It went from a 4 or 5 out of 10 to a 7.5 or 8 at least. So yeah, do reconsider this one. Baldo is a rather challenging game actually, no walk in the park at all. The dungeons have a lot of complex sections to figure out and in meaningful and great ways too, making you earn your progress, which feels very satisfying, given that you like a good challenge, that is. This is an awesome 3D Zelda-like right here nowadays, so do consider giving it a second chance. But the best game on this list, in my opinion, has to be Airoheart. This, more than a Zelda game, it reminds me of Terranigma. Not sure if many of you ever played Terranigma, but it's definitely one of my favorite games of all time. Now this is not as good as that, okay? That would be a daunting task, but it definitely offers a great experience. I love the graphics, though I've seen people who don't, but the gameplay is where it's at. It's simple but effective. You have a regular attack or a dash attack that functions unlike anything I've seen in games of this kind. If you use it but don't touch any enemies, it functions simply as a dodge move. But if you connect, you dish out a powerful knockback attack that deals more damage and is necessary to remove enemies' shields. This creates a very interesting dynamic to the combats. The dungeons feel nice to explore with interesting puzzles, and the story is also a treat. I really enjoyed this one, even if it's not as Zelda as many others on the list. I still see it as the best among all of these. Do check this one out, Airoheart. And for the final title on the list, we have a free game, Time Thief. This is a pretty simple one, but also pretty cool. It's clearly inspired in Minute, not only in the minimalistic visuals, but in the gameplay as well. It's actually a very interesting take on the 60-second timer of Minute. You also have 60 seconds left, but the timer increases by a few seconds with every enemy you kill. So this is a great incentive not to avoid the fights. This is a real fun game, despite the extremely simple gameplay and graphics, well worth the $0 you'll pay for it. And that's it for today. This is just episode 1 of this new series. I'll be covering several other genres of games released in 2022 that are getting pretty much no attention from gamers or games media. So do stay tuned to the channel, and if you believe in this mission of shedding light into obscure games, consider joining the channel's Patreon, like these lovely people whose name you're seeing now. I'm trying to reach sustainability with this channel, and any help, even $1, would be much appreciated. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you soon.